We are trying to understand the concept of markets, and as an example, we have been looking at the market for black unsweet coffee as in number of cups. Our interest is how are prices determined, or how and why do they change, and the same thing applies to quantity traded. And by quantity traded, once again, we mean quantity bought and sold. And once again, we are interested in the same question, like in the case of prices, and that is how is quantity traded determined, and how and why does it change. As a first step, in the previous three videos, we looked at or tried to understand the economic behavior of consumers. And all this is reflected through the demand side of the story, or the demand curve. And now what we do is we look at the second economic agent and look at and try to understand the economic behavior of sellers. And we'll try to capture this or understand all this through supply. And since we are looking at black unsweet coffee as in number of cups, what we'll try to capture is economic behavior of sellers of black unsweet coffee. To understand the supply side of the story, the first thing we need to do is understand the concept of supply. And by supply we mean it's the desire to sell goods or and services backed by the ability to do so. Or essentially what we are doing is we are looking at serious sellers. So I have the desire to sell goods, but then I also have the capability to supply this product to the market. And so essentially what we are looking at are serious sellers. And once again, like we looked at as in the case of consumers, if the price is right, the seller has the capability to supply to the market. So we are interested in understanding the supply of coffee. This is our example that we have been working through. And we want to figure out what factors caused quantity supplied of coffee. So the variable that we need to explain is quantity supplied of coffee. We'll abbreviate this as QSC, and this will be measured as in number of cups. Now think about it. What would quantity supplied of coffee depend on? The first factor that comes to our mind is price per cup of coffee, and we abbreviate this as PC, like the way we had done on the demand side, and we measure this as in dollars per cup. Another factor which could impact our supply of coffee would be input prices. By inputs, we mean things like labor, the cost of material, rent of the building, and the profits made by entrepreneurs. So these could also have a bearing on how much a seller is willing to supply of a particular product, in our case coffee. So let us abbreviate input prices as IP, and this will be measured as per dollars per input. Another factor which could impact quantity supplied of coffee is the technology. And we know what technology can do. It can either introduce us or make us produce new products, or and also help us produce existing or new products at a lower cost. So technology also becomes a relevant factor in terms of quantity supplied of coffee. And let us abbreviate technology as TY. It's hard for us to measure technology, so just let's leave the units as they are. Now, the way we have listed these variables, we know quantity supplied is the dependent or the endogenous variable. This is the variable that we want to understand or explain. And then we have also listed a bunch of independent or exogenous variables which can explain quantity supplied of coffee. And these variables are price per cup of coffee, input prices, and technology. And once again, we could write all this in a compact fashion. QSC, which is quantity supplied of coffee, is a function of, F again stands for function of PC, price per cup of coffee, IP, input prices, and TY, technology. Now, we want to understand quantity supplied of coffee, and we can invoke a simplifying assumption like ceteris paribus, and this simply means holding all other variables as constant. So let us do this. Suppose we are interested in understanding the impact of price per cup of coffee on quantity supplied of coffee. And when we are trying to understand this, what we'll do is we'll assume all other factors like input prices and technology stay the same, so that we can isolate the effect of price changes on quantity supplied of coffee. Next, what we do is we list different prices, pretty much the same prices that we have used in the study of consumer behavior. We ask a typical seller of coffee to tell us how many cups of coffee would he or she be willing to sell at each given price. If the price is $1 per cup, this person tells us this person is willing to sell 2 cups of coffee. If the price is $2 per cup, this person is willing to sell 4 cups of coffee. And in this manner, this person completes this table, and so we have these numbers. Now, this table contains information about supply of coffee, so we could write supply, and this is a schedule. So this is an example of supply schedule. Supply schedule. And this information on the supply schedule, and now what we do is we simply plot those points. Like we did in the case of demand, we keep price per cup of coffee as in dollars per cup on the vertical axis. Now since we are looking at supply, on the horizontal axis what we have is quantity supplied of coffee as in number of cups. And we have plotted the information that we had on supply schedule, and that is when the price is $1 per cup, this person is willing to sell 2 cups of coffee. When the price is $4 per cup, this person is willing to sell 8 cups of coffee. And in a similar way, we plot all those points and we join them, and what we get is a curve or a line. And this curve or a line contains information about supply, and so a line or curve like this is called the supply curve. It's called the supply curve. So this is an example of a supply curve. Think about is, why do we want to sell more at a higher price and less at a lower price? And if you are not interested in selling, why do businesses do this? Why are they interested in selling more at a higher price and less at a lower price? And then a relatively easy question, what is the relationship between price per cup of coffee and the sales revenue? What is sales revenue? It's the amount of money earned by a business when it sells some product. So So what is the relationship between price per cup of coffee and sales revenue earned on coffee? Just think about it, and I think you can easily figure out the answer to this question. Now what we have done is we have looked at the behavior of one seller. Now suppose in place of one seller we have two sellers, and we have information about the first seller, and we know how much this person is willing to sell at each given price. We know that. Suppose we have another seller, let's call this person seller 2, and to keep it easy for ourselves, let us assume the second seller is very similar to the first seller in terms of how much this person is willing to sell at each given price. So we find exactly the same numbers. Now what we want to figure out is how much is the quantity supplied by both sellers taken together, that is seller 1 plus seller 2, at each given price. And this is what we find. When the price is $1 per cup, the first seller is willing to sell 2 cups of coffee. The second seller is willing to sell 2 cups of coffee, or together they are willing to sell 4 cups of coffee. When the price is $2 per cup, seller 1 is willing to sell 4 cups of coffee, seller 2 is willing to sell 4 cups of coffee, or together sellers 1 and 2 are willing to sell 8 cups of coffee. And in a similar way, for prices like 3, 4 and 5, we can figure out the combined supply of both sellers taken together. Now, what we have is a combined supply schedule for two sellers taken together, and we have information on price and quantity supplied by both sellers taken together. Once again, we have price per cup of coffee as in dollars per cup on the horizontal axis, quantity supplied of coffee as in number of cups on the horizontal axis, and we know when the price is $1 per cup, both sellers together are willing to sell 4 cups of coffee. When the price is $4 per cup, just as an example, both of them together are willing to sell 16 cups of coffee. And we can do a similar thing for other price levels. And now suppose we have millions of sellers of coffee around the world, and this could be very true. How do we determine the combined supply curve for millions of sellers around the world? And what we do is, we are adding up quantities at each given price, and quantities, we know quantity supplied is represented on the horizontal axis. And so when we are deriving the combined supply curve, what we do is we add up over the horizontal axis, or the principle we are using is the principle of horizontal aggregation. And through this we can draw in. And now what we have is, we have quantity supplied of coffee now in terms of millions of cups, and what we have is a market supply curve. Now what we find is there is a positive relationship between price and quantity supplied of coffee, and it applies to millions of sellers around the world. And so now, based on all that we know, now we can write down the law of supply, and this is what it is. Ceteris paribus, there exists a positive relationship between price and quantity supplied of the same product. We are looking at price of coffee against quantity supplied of coffee. So this is the famous law of supply.